Would you say that during the Renaissance that they were right in one aspect, that specifically in their location in the European peninsula, that they were the ones having an issue with Funun and Ulum, but not
Yes, they were having this issue because the problem that they had with this issue of Ulum and Funun is because of the inability to understand the connection between them, because the learning and their institutes came about as something very different. Their Funun were founded by laity,
right,
and not scholars, because remember, the Latin rite of the Catholic Church was skeptical of learning outside of the Bible. So they're not going to create those fields.
Sure.
So curious laity created those fields. But that's not possible without the Protestant Reformation, which improved levels of literacy, because now more people are reading the Bible in the local vernacular because Luther translates the Bible into German. So now people aren't reading in Latin anymore. And they say, oh, wow, the word of God can be read in German. So now you have masses and other things starting to happen in the local language, whereas previous to that time, it had to be in Latin or in Greek if you were Latin right. So this is what's happening. So now it switches to local language. So now people are doing like the mass in like French and getting in trouble with the government. But the groundswell is so powerful, and there's such a curiosity. Oh man, for the first time I understand the mass, or I feel like because it's in my language I know what's going on. People are now doing the mass, and that leads to the breakdown of Latin into the Romance languages. So Romance is the vulgar form of Latin, and from Romance you get French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. Before that time, those languages didn't exist. There was just Latin. So in the breakdown of these things, and then Luther inadvertently, I'm sure he didn't count on it, but he inadvertently created kind of an orthodoxy within the German language, because there was no unified German language. But by him translating it into his unique dialect, it kind of popularized that form of German, which took hold. So now you had all these laity reading the Bible for themselves. What's to stop them from reading other stuff?
Sure. Yes.
Nothing. So now they start reading other stuff. Now you start getting the classics being translated as well, like Homer and other kutub from the Greek period now getting translated into German, which had previously been in Latin, because now people can understand and they start making moves. And now this starts to happen. The monks class or the priest class, they're not going to do that, because they believe that those things have a level of danger to them that should not be widely spread. So it's a completely different understanding of how knowledge is to be dealt with.
Yes.
Whereas when the Muslims, when we were translating things from Greek into Arabic, we're like, it's not a problem translating, just don't digest the stuff that's impermissible. We'll take the math, we'll take this theological stuff, we'll keep that, but we're not going to digest it. We're not going to teach it, but we'll keep it, because it's a sign of what nations had before.
Yes.
But when you start digesting it and saying, oh yeah, I'll go ahead and spread this, make it part of my curriculum. It's like, no, that shouldn't be part of your curriculum. Right? That's where it starts to become a problem. So Ibn Al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, if you look at Ibn Al-Jawzi and say St. Thomas Aquinas, they're coming out of very different realities. They're both scholars, but one is able, Ibn Al-Jawzi is able to freely read, write, publish, have an observatory as how whatever findings he comes to. St. Thomas Aquinas has to function within a very narrow orthodoxy. And he has to be skeptical of any knowledge that he gathers outside of that orthodoxy, because he can't make independent inquiry. Ibn al-Jawzi can. He can't say, this is interesting. I think based upon this was this. You can't do that. You see, when you're, again, as we discussed before, when your theology is clear, for the most part, when your theology is clear and you know what, okay, listen, we have no more data beyond this point. then you can focus your time and your energy, your mental energies, into areas where you can get to the bottom of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or where you can express your creativity. And so Ibn Al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, expressed his creativity in a wide, in a wide and vast array of areas. Whereas St. Thomas Aquinas, right, some of the more important things that were going on in this time period with regard to the earth and its age and all these other things, he couldn't have an opinion on some of these things, because to acknowledge it would mean having to deal with it.
And he would be persecuted for that?
Yeah. Dealing with the size of the earth,
Right.
its shape,
Right.
whether it has movement or not. How do we deal with the movement of the earth versus how do we deal with that when we start talking about things like pollination or the shadows of the earth, how they change? How do we explain that when we say that the earth doesn't move? Whereas Ibn Al-Jawzi had solved that dilemma.
And also, at the time of St. Thomas Aquinas, weren't they also stuck in creedal debates?
Yes, there were huge debates about the nature of Christ, whether he had a human nature or whether his nature was completely divine, divine and human. There were all these huge debates because they were debating about things they knew nothing about, though, because there's no way to, because you're trying to talk about the Lord of all creation, which you've already limited as man. And then you're trying to debate about those things, right? And it's similar to what's happening to some Muslims in the English-speaking world.
Absolutely.
Is the Rasulullah made out of light or not? Ooh, what about his parents? What about the, they're all into this stuff, right? But they're not into anything else.
Interesting. The fact that they were kept busy by these debates, that is already sufficient that they can't continue, because if your creed, if your theology is not sound, how can you continue with anything else?
That's it. And their attitude is until we solve this, we can't do anything else.
So it's like it's a disaster. You're stuck.
So you can't do anything else. So meanwhile, whole world is going by. Other people are building their world and living their life, and you're just kind of in these perpetual wars. And for what, though? Okay, fine. You've been at war for this many years about Christological difference. Did Christ have a human nature, or did he have a human and a divine nature? Was nature all the way divine? Was it only human? Is the Trinity or monarchicism, and is the Trinity, are all of them God, or is only Arianism versus it just got to be so much. And then eventually, okay, now you have your orthodoxy, but now there's other issues. Is baptism full immersion or sprinkling? Then you have your other issues. Is salvation by faith alone, or do deeds play a part? And it's like, I thought this stuff was, it's like, that's 500 years ago, Akhi.
Yeah.
It's like, now you're 1,460 years into the church. This wasn't sorted before. So now you have to have the Council of Trent regarding what salvation is and everything else. This wasn't sorted before.
And they were around before before the revelation of the Quran.
Yeah.
It's a long time now, I know.
So it's like so you didn't get this sorted before then?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it from this standpoint, in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Christological debates were still happening.
Yeah, sure.
Like whether or not Maryam alayhi salam could be called Mother of God, because she was carrying the Nabi Isa Islam, was viewed to be the son of God, and which makes him God. So could she be called Theotokos or not?
At this time, Christianity has been around for 600 years then.
Yes. About 400 or 500 in the form we know. Catholic Church, the Latin Rite has just formed.
All right, yeah.
So that's around 580, 580. So now there's those battles happening. And okay, because Maryam alayhi salam is carrying the Messiah in her womb, does she have to be sinless?
Man.
Because she can't be a corrupted being carrying pure deity. So then the doctrine starts up called the Immaculate Conception, where you believe that Maryam alayhi salam had no sin nature. She wasn't sinful. But then it's like, well, wait a minute, hold on. Were her parents sinful? Oh, that's a good point. So now the Immaculate Conception. So then it's believed that there's this line of people. Nabi Isa is in line. It's like all the women had no sin, like every single last one of them.
It's like kalam arguments.
Yeah, because it's the only way to solve this
Right.
thing. Because they think that they're solving some type of contradictions. Like, what do we do?
Yes, yes.
And then people start to get persecuted. But then they think, well, wait a minute. If she's sinless, did she die an earthly death? So now you have a discussion where there's some Christians still to this day that believed in what's called her assumption, where she did not die an earthly death. Instead, she was taken up. Because this resolves the issue of whether she had corruptible flesh or not, and whether she died.
So they are getting into all of these arguments, and none of this is in their text.
None of this is in the text. It's just they're having to deal with these because based upon conclusions that they've come to, they've now got to get in these battles. Now, during this time, Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi has written Al-Muntazam.
MashaAllah.
He's written Al-Du'afa wa Matrukin. He's written At-Tahqiq. He's written Al-Wujuh wa Nadha'ir. He's on this massive writing project that's happening. He's doing tahqiq on these different kutub. He's discussing the different aspects of the human beings, like why human beings are the way that they are, how they get pulled away. Tib al-Ruhani, where he's discussing how to feed the soul right, how to look after the soul. All this other stuff is happening. Talbis Iblis, all this other stuff is being written. All these other things are happening while there's huge wars being waged about Maryam alayhi salam, and also, could you still count her as a virgin after the birth of Nabi Isa? And did she engage in sexual intercourse? Was she married? And if she did she engage in intercourse before, during, or after the birth of Nabi Isa?
So is that here where they come with the opinions of Joseph?
Yeah, so now they're like, okay, well, how do we deal with this? Because, and then the doctrine comes of what's called perpetual virginity, where it's like, okay, listen, yes, she did give birth to the Messiah, who was God, so she was mother of God, but her virginity remained intact in spite of giving birth to the Messiah. And her husband never came near her for sexual intercourse. So they never had sex even though they were married. So it's like, oh, okay. So then there were other doctrines of, okay, so now you had people, and then around the same time, you get what's called the holy relics. So there's people that say, I have a piece of the original cross that he was crucified on. Then someone said, I've got the original foreskin of Nabi Isa when he was circumcised. Someone started claiming that they had the hymen of Maryam alayhi salam, the original virginal hymen, when Nabi Isa was born. All this stuff, akhi.
Are these debates still going on today?
Most of this has been settled.
Okay.
In the Eastern churches, this has been settled for some time. In the Western churches, because of the rise of Protestantism, these arguments are rearing their head again.
Right.
Because Protestantism had cut off all this discussion because they said, we're going to go back to the Bible and we're only going to read what's in there, and that's it. But now, as Protestantism is waning because it's losing vitality, people are starting to look at what were we before we were Protestants. And there's been a number of high-profile conversions from Protestantism to the Catholic Church or Greek Orthodox. Hank Hanegraaff of the Bible Answer Man, he converted and became Greek Orthodox, which shook the Protestant world. There's Protestants that he's no longer Christian. They just went crazy on him. So all this stuff is the result of things that were happening at the time of Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah. And yet he's doing all this. Well, you can't write 1,000 books if your mind's not clear.
Exactly, yes.
And you have to be able to have the levity, the ability, the strength, and the free mind to do so.
Mhm.
He's able to do so. So all of these things are important as Muslims for us.
Mhm. Right.
They're all important.
Mhm. Just one thing I want to ask you. When the kuffar of today say religion and science can't go together, obviously, this is particular to them, but to a degree, this statement is actually sound when you look at the European Peninsula, but it does not apply in any way to us.
This discussion really it's an issue for them because of,
Right.
again, how they came to perceive learning.
Right.
For us, it's not the same,
Okay.
because for us, science and religion are topics that deal with different affairs, right? Religion is dealing with why things are and how life is discharged, and religion deals with the pure reality of affairs. Science deals with how things work after the point of creation. After that point. What happened in the European Peninsula is that some people attempted to use science to explain why.
Right, yes.
To explain why. And this is not the purpose of science in its origin. That's not its point. Its point is to explain, how do things work? How do they work? Why is this mountain here eroding at this rate of this many inches per year? Why is that happening? Well, it looks to be the case that how that's happening is due to the high salt levels in the area are washing over it, and it's causing erosion. How is that happening? And then looking at the chain of events, forming a well-posited opinion. Then after that, you have a hypothesis and working theory. Then if it becomes established fact, then it's now a scientific fact. That's what science is. It's coming to conclusions through observing phenomena in our midst. But it's after the point of creation. Because you weren't there at the beginning of creation. You have to observe it after that fact. And you acknowledge there are going to be certain issues, as we discussed before, like contaminants.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the age of things and you use the level of radiation and a half-life as your measuring stick, you have to start by granting the fact that not only does Earth put off radiation, but so do plants, and so does the sun. So you can't be sure to separate between radiations, if you will, to give an exact date. You have to also acknowledge that you're making an assumption that radiation and half-life have been consistent for as long as they've been, which is an assumption that you're making. And it's an issue when you make that assumption, because you can't be sure that that's the case, because you don't have any proof of continuity, because you weren't there at the point of creation. Also, the rocks that are on Earth today were not the rocks that were there at the point of creation, because they've long eroded away and melted down. So you know that you are extrapolating. Versus someone like Richard Dawkins, who's never done any field work, he says it's a fact. It's not a fact if you don't have the original. If you don't have the original rocks, there's no way for you to know.
Interesting.
So this is the issue. So science for us isn't about trying to explain why things are and telling science doesn't tell you the reality of things. Science tells you how they work. How did I get sick? Well, it looks to be the case that you ingested something that was past date and it was contained bacteria. That bacteria then infected you and caused these complications. That's how. But it doesn't tell you the reality, because in order to know the reality of something is you have to completely encompass that thing, and you have to be distinct from the thing. And no human being can observe something happening in creation and be separate from creation at the same time. That's impossible. The only one that encompasses all things in reality and is distinct from creation is Allah. He's distinct from the creation. He's creator, creation is creation. So he sees things as the reality as they are. Because when human beings observe things happening in creation, because we're part of creation, our data will be skewed. It will be contaminated. So when prophets come with revelation, they're coming with pure reality. This is the reality. That's why when they're making prophecies, it's not a prediction. It's a fact on what's going to happen. Because the one who created all things knows the reality of all things and knows what's going to happen before it elapses, because he's created everything and knows everything and said, this is going to happen and this army's going to lose in battle. Then in 100 years, this is going to happen. How's he able to know this stuff? Like when people were looking at the signs end of time, it was a reminder for a lot of Muslim brothers, because they're like, man, look at all the prophecies. How on earth did this, right? It's like, yeah, that's the difference between prophecy and science. Science has to deal with a margin of error. Prophecy is, this is information straight from reality. Completely different. Science has a margin of error. That's why Ibn Al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, he had a certain margin of error regarding the size of the earth. There's a margin of error, right? His position regarding the distance between the continents, there's a certain margin of error there. And he acknowledged that at the beginning of Al-Muntazam. The margin of error there. But if you look at the effort he put in and his level of research and his ijtihad, Allah rewarded for his ijtihad, because that was ijtihad as well, looking at all the data and gathering everything together. This man's a high ranking. And that shows what the Marja people do and can do at their best. That's what they can produce. So Imam Al-Jawzi is one of those signs of Allah in the creation. He's a hujjah of that he produced all of this in his history books, like his tafsir. He'll somehow come up with some things in tafsir, just completely like the distance of the sun from the earth. He discussed this in Al-Muntazam, and he referred to it in the tafsir without mentioning it in detail, but said, please refer to my other book on this topic.
And in which funun, or how many funun was he actually an expert in?
So you have the 18 sciences of the revealed law. And in the funun that you're looking at, astronomy, you have astronomy, math, the burgeoning field of, now some people call it ilm al-hay'a, because later ilm al-nujum had a different meaning. Ilm al-hay'a is astronomy, but it's also the science of the movement of heavenly bodies, right? Hisab is math and also calculations to do with integers and conic functions. Algebra, because these were separate things, right? Calculus, right? These are the areas, ilm al-tarikh, history. In fact, he carved out his own niche within history, the way that he documented history in the Muntazam, right? Then you have ilm al-miyat, which is the hydrology or the science behind water, which really he'd taken from Al-Karji, because Al-Karji was one of the first books to deal with water, and he used, and this wound up spreading from Baghdad to Iran and other places, using water and gravity to create indoor flushing toilets, right? And so he did this. It's like a 93-page book that he laid out like his graphs and everything else, al-miyah, waters, where he discussed this stuff in detail. And Ibn Al-Jawzi was, that book, he would have had to have access to that to make some of the pronouncements that he's made on the different seas and water and how water works and how we observe water and things like this. Then he also would have had access to Kitab al-Quwat by Hibatullah al-Baghdadi, who was another big Hanbali sheikh, who laid the building blocks of what we call gravity in English, right? He discussed that, pushing and pulling forces and what that means, right? So all these areas Ibn Al-Jawzi excelled in and bequeathed this vast knowledge to us.
Was he the founder of the flushing toilet and the likes that they had at the time?
No, Al-Karji was. Al-Karji
Al-Karji
was the
was.
was the one. But
Okay.
he further built on top of
Mm-hmm.
the discussion regarding hydrology and the science behind water and water's effects that it has on the environment for things like erosion and the use of water in other fields. So by Ibn al-Jawzi's time, water is being used in Baghdad. Steam is being used under Baghdad to keep the city warm in the winter and to keep it cool in the summer.
MashaAllah. Remarkable.
Right. Flush toilets are being used utilizing water and gravity to cause the flushing. Right. These things are being used for these purposes. It's being used for irrigation, to speed irrigation and drainage. Right. So this is the world that Ibn al-Jawzi is coming up in. It's a very advanced world. He had a book also on herbs, where he discussed herbs under his, I think it's Tafsirah or Hadiqa, another book that he wrote where he discussed herbs in detail. And then there's another book, Funun, of Kitab Funun, where it looks to me, and I could be mistaken, it looks to me like he's condensed Al-Funun by Ibn Aqil and taken parts from that about herbs and medicine and other things and just discussed that in greater detail. So that he just he really, Allah really blessed him, to use his time, because that's one of the things you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to put barakah in your time. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in his time. He really put a lot of barakah in his time. And when you look at the tabaqat, when they mention his books, the mentioning of his books runs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. And then his poetry is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages of poetry. And then also mentioning his fatawa, in which he had some rare fatawa that was different to the people of his time. Right.
Yeah. I would like to get to that topic, inshallah.
Yes.
Yes, so please continue.
Yes, so these are the things that he was distinct from in fiqh and other matters, where he stood apart from other people. And the Imam really was a distinct figure. And that's why I think he was a standalone in his era, and he was different to every other group of people, and he was different to so many other scholars in his time. And it's because of his love of ilm and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed him. And I think it's a little bit of the fact that who he's related to, with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him sort of an edge. Those are things that you can't teach. That's something where you either have it or you don't. And I think that was an instance where he just kind of had something that you can't really take that away, can you?
He's definitely one of those scholars. When you think about the greatest scholars from the Khalif, like his name immediately pops up.
Yes. I mean, he just, you can't, there's not a single science of the revealed laws sciences that he doesn't have a book in. And there's not an area in the Funun that his name doesn't hold some weight in. You want to talk history, he's in there. You want to talk math, he's in there. You want to talk other stuff, he's in. It's like, I found so many statements from him on diverse topics. I'm like, what in the world is this doing in here? Like, I found like some wisdom that he's just thrown in. What about this? Even Sayd al-Khatir, which is a collection of like his a number of thoughts that he has on different things that he wanted to bring out. That has things in there where he's just thrown that in there. And he's really a cut above. He's a cut above the rest. And it's so funny because perennialists and other freaks have a problem with him because of
Really?
his statements against imposter Sufiya.
Subhanallah.
But then cultists will also have problems with him because of statements he made in favor of tasawwuf and
Right.
ihsan and things like this. So it's like he's walking that middle line, mashallah. Walking that
Subhanallah.
middle line.
Is he actually the scholar who has authored the most books from all of the scholars?
I would say probably. I don't know of anyone, not just among Muslims, but in history.
Wow.
I don't know of anyone who's by his own hand has authored more books in more subjects than this man. Because Ibn Suyuti's authored 748.
Wow.
But Ibn Al-Jawzi is like 2000. It's just like, that's just that's a cut above.
Unbelievable.
And his attitude as well to the science is like, when I looked in the sciences, I found that they were lacking or empty, and I felt that I had to fill them. So I started writing books on them because that's how he saw it. Like they were lacking something. Like each science was like missing something. So he did like a sharh on Bukhari with fiqh al-hadith inside of it and said it was missing this science was missing this. So I wrote this. This was missing this. So I wrote this.
The fact that he had, subhanAllah, so much blessings in his time and the capacity to understand all of those funun and ulum.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I mean, when you really consider what he did,
unbelievable.
and the impact that he has, it just and in the religion, his name just comes up. It just will crop up somewhere out of nowhere, where it'll be some topic, and you won't think that his name, and it just crops up. How many people, to be Iblis, like how many people have cited this book? How many people keep bringing that book up? Constantly bring that book up.
Right.
Even out of context, Defa Shuba Tashbih is constantly referenced. It's out of context.
Yes.
But it's still referenced. And you, as usual, people that know neither the table nor the cloth that's spread on it will make these citations from Defa Shuba Tashbih. It's humorous, but it's also disturbing at the same time, because if they really got the fruit from this man that they should have, they would have benefited much more.
And the fact that you also find a lot of statements on the heart by Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi in so many books, it tells also that his level of ihsan.
Yes, I mean, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali said about him that there were few in his time that had as much knowledge of the amal and states of the first three generations than him. That's why he was so masterful. Because when it comes to the knowledge of the first three generations, and you can see that in his book Sifatul Safwa, which is a listing of the first three generations of the great Sufi and Zuhad. That's all that book is.
Right. SubhanAllah.
And so you can see, and he has just such a mastery of their history, when they were born, when they died, and also their acts of ihsan and their worship. Like he has just mastery of that, like complete mastery. And you can't fake that. You either have it or you don't. People make claims about how they follow the first three, but do they?
Right.
Could they measure up with that? How closely do they really follow them? And that's something that deserves to be examined. Like how closely, you follow the first years, how closely do you really follow them? We're talking about this man that follows them, and that's something about his written legacy, which I think we can bring up discussing his written legacy. Because I'd like to mention some selected kutub in each science, without being too laborious, because that'll become like a separate podcast. But I wanted to mention a few kutub in each science, and to give a short biography or thesis on each kitab that in that side, just to whet people's appetite on exactly what's there. When we talk about his written legacy, yeah, that would be for, I think, the second recording. That's where we can flesh
Yeah.
out his creed. We can talk about the
Yes.
kutub in each part of
Yeah.
his legacy, because his written legacy is something to really behold. And I want for people to have a good understanding of that, because his presentation in the English speaking world, um, has been sort of skewed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's been by both parties who are adamant about something, about an individual that has nothing to do with either one. Like, had he been alive, he would have negated both of them. And yet both parties claim him, which is it's always a strange thing that, both the dog and cat claim the sheep as their own. And it's a strange thing, but it's something that occurs. But it is a case that there'll be certain august figures in this religion that are claimed by two extremes, one on each side of the spectrum, right? So you will get Ibn Al-Jawzi claimed by two ends of the spectrum, right? By revilers as well as sycophants. The same thing with Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, same weird thing where people will insist that they have the most mastery about these individuals where they have the least knowledge of them. How do you have a book or the books of these people in your house, and yet you don't know their placement within their school or their tradition and who they belong to and their rank? If you understood this, it would give you much more respect for the scholars of the religion. And Ibn al-Jawzi is, he's if you were to call him a mountain, he's one of the higher peaks from amongst the mountains. He's a higher peak. You get the one mountain that's, you have Mount Everest. You have the first three generations, right? Mount Everest. Then you have K2. That's Ibn al-Jawzi. He's K2, the one right behind Mount Everest. He's right behind it. I think that would be a fair assessment. That the first three generations are Mount Everest, pushing far above the clouds. And then K2, which is just behind Mount Everest, I think that's Ibn al-Jawzi. Because he's combined. As I've said before, Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah, each student took something from him.
Right.
Like Abdul Ghani ibn Abdul Wahid al-Maqdisi took away hadith. Muwaffaq Qudama, Abu Umar al-Maqdisi, they took, right, Muwaffaq took fiqh, Abu Umar al-Maqdisi took the zuhud. But I think Ibn al-Jawzi kind of combined several things because of how many writings he did. I think he kind of combined several things. Not just one, not just like tafsir. I think he kind of combined a number of things because of just his uniqueness and his desire for hadith, his desire for tafsir, and his desire for learning to where he encompassed such a wide body of known knowledge. Because you have what's called knowable knowledge, right? Knowable knowledge. And he encompassed a lot of knowable knowledge. So you're talking about the revealed law, then he goes into the funun of knowable knowledge, goes into that. And you're talking about a man, he didn't do a lot of traveling. But through dealing with other historical accounts, meeting people who circumnavigated the globe, he has his own scientific findings he's doing. He's able to come to conclusions about the world, even though he didn't make huge circumnavigational work of circumnavigational travel of the world. That just by measuring the shadows to be able to understand that the world is moving. to use shadows as well as the weight of rocks to calculate the weight of the earth, to use shadows, eclipses, and things like that to be able to understand the distance of the sun from the earth, the distance of the sun from the moon, and the distance of the moon from the earth. And then also to be able to accurately predict eclipses in his local area. These are all beneficial things. But it's because of a mind that's clear of pollution and a heart that's clean of innovations and other things. So you can exert yourself in those fields because your mind and your heart aren't occupied with frivolous pursuits. So you can exert yourself. And when you can exert yourself, that's what you get. That's what you get. The people that I mentioned, Hibatullah al-Baghdadi, al-Karji, these are like some of the great early Hanbalis of Baghdad. And look at what they did. A book on hydrology, a book on forces, pulling and pushing forces. How are they able to do that? Because of the attention that they placed to their religion. And then after that, their mind and heart is clear. It's pure of pollutants. It's pure of pollutants. If your mind and heart are polluted with things, you can't do that. You can't have pollutants here. Have to be pure.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khairan. Before continuing, there was just one more thing I wanted to ask. Did Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi have his own jami' or institute that he used to teach at?
Okay. He had an area known as the Madrasah Al-Jawziya. And this Madrasah Al-Jawziya was in Baghdad. And the father of Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziya was a principal at the school, which is why he's called Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziya. It's because of this, right? So yes, he did have an institute where he taught ilm, right? And this institute where he taught ilm, he taught tafsir, fiqh, creed, and he also taught some funun, right? So there were discussions about things around the astrolabe, things to do with shadows, because shadows are also important for measuring salah times. Also, shadows can also indicate the qibla and things like this. So shadows were extremely important. And math. So he discussed pure math, right? So you start talking about coefficients and all these other types of things in math and their relation to one another, and really, you know, what's communicable and what's non-communicable, and really exciting stuff. And that really got people's minds working, because math is one of those things. Math, if taught right, can excite students and can open up worlds to them that have previously been closed. So,
and was that institute around after his death, or when did it? How long did it stay around?
The institute continued on until the Tatar invasion.
Oh wow, subhanallah.
It continues on to the Tatar invasion. So Ibn Al-Jawzi, his father and uncle are among the last of those to live during that time. Because now, by that time, now the ilm starts to transfer to Damascus, because Baghdad starts to slow down because of the cataclysmic invasions, because there was that big invasion and there were a few other invasions after.
So then after that, would it have been like a salihiyya in Damascus?
Yes, you would have had that, which is the transfer of the ilm. The Mustansiriya also had people, because the Mustansiriya is where Ibn al-Jawzi's son and grandson attended. So when they suffered setbacks in Baghdad, they attended the Mustansiriya, and the Mustansiriya is still open. Even through the American invasion and all that other stuff, it stayed open. So the Mustansiriya is still there.
Subhanallah. And Since you mentioned the Tatar invasion, his son Muhyiddin Yusuf, he was present there, right, when the Tatars
This
came
is
in.
correct.
He was martyred, right?
Yes.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah. And then his grandson, Sibt ibn Jawzi.
Mhm.
The Sibt, he was actually Hanafi.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
And he wrote Mir'atu Zaman and a number of other beneficial kutub. And he also wrote a history, tarjuma of his father. So
SubhanAllah.
yeah, Sibt ibn Jawzi was also a great man. I mean, so everyone that came out of the lineage of Ibn Jawzi was a standout. He
Mhm.
was a standout. And the son wrote a commentary on Ibn Jawzi's fiqh work,
MashaAllah.
al-madhhab al-madhhab.
I read that Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi was very close to his son Muhyiddin. He used to love him.
Yes, he had a
MashaAllah.
great respect for him.
SubhanAllah.
Great respect for him. He is one of he's one of the successors of Ibn Jawzi's ilm
SubhanAllah.
after him, which is
MashaAllah.
something that, inshallah, we can discuss under
InshaAllah.
the written legacy, the successors of Ibn Jawzi's ilm, like the
Definitely.
carriers of his ilm.
So, Alhamdulillah, now, Jazakallah khairan,
Right.
we've addressed the life and a lot of things surrounding the Imam, and inshallah, we will presume with his written legacy, his rank, creed, and more, inshallah. So, I say, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.